Matthew chapter 6, we'll take for our text one verse today. Verse number 24. Matthew 6, verse 24. It says, "No man can serve two masters, for either he will hate the one and love the other, or else he will hold to the one and despise the other. You cannot serve God and mammon." Cough drop was bigger than I thought it was going to be. Can hardly talk. Sorry about that. So we've been studying in this passage for a while. In fact, we started studying through Matthew in the latter part of 2017. So we rung in the new year, and we've been going through. Verse 24 being our text. Today I want to preach a message on the topic of serving God. Serving God. A lot of different topics that we've been able to pull from even the last couple of chapters here as Jesus is preaching the Sermon on the Mount. And this one is no different. However, those of you who have journeyed with us, been with me through the last several weeks especially, you know that Matthew 6:24 isn't a verse all by itself. Although we can pull it out and make it a text of a sermon, it is certainly related and connected to everything that we've studied so far. Christ, in his message here on the Sermon on the Mount, he has been separating the true from the false, bringing out the differences between true worshipers and hypocrites. He's distinguished between the two different kinds of treasures, earthly treasure and heavenly. Last Lord's Day we talked about the single eye, and indeed how it is different than the evil eye. And so now he is, in this message, bringing out to his hearers, and thankfully it is recorded for us, that there is indeed two masters, and there's a problem with trying to serve them both. Now, right from the onset, I want to say that all difficulties or any kind of doubts about this verse are removed when you consider something. And that is what the original meaning is behind this word master. Because some people approach this and say, you know what? It's not a problem for me to serve two masters because I have two jobs and I've got a boss here and I've got a boss over here and I serve them both. Well, maybe you do, but something deeper is being taught here. That word serve that we read here in our English is actually rendered better slave. It means to be the slave of. The slave relationship then is one that implies exclusive ownership and demands exclusive service. Now I know that a slave might belong to two masters. And while I say it in the present, I am convinced and I do realize that slavery is against the law in America. I don't need anybody on YouTube or Facebook to write to me and tell me about that. But slavery does exist in this world, in other places. And so, yes, we use it in the present tense. And a person might be slave to two masters. But in order for that to work, it would have to be two masters who are in agreement. In our text, it's implied that these two masters are opposed to each other. On one hand, you have God. On the other, you have the world and its representations. And so while slavery is illegal in this country, and I'm thankful that it is, in the sense of the word that we may understand it with African American slavery, here's the fact of the matter, and that is that in the context of the passage, there's still God and there's still the world and its representation. Who is your master? You can have one or you can have the other, but you cannot have both. This is nothing new, by the way. This is something that is very, very old. In fact, it's as old as people themselves, I would imagine. Go back with me to the Old Testament in Joshua chapter 24. Joshua chapter 24, in verse 15. Joshua called out the people there, and he says, "And if it seem evil unto you to serve the Lord, choose you this day whom you will serve, whether the gods which your fathers served that were on the other side of the flood, or the gods of the Amorites in whose land you dwell. But as for me and my house, we will serve the Lord." So Joshua understood that there was this either or, but not both. Choose you this day who you will serve, whether the gods of the Amorites, the gods that your father served on the other side of the flood, or will you serve them, or will you serve the Lord? And he said, "As for me and my house, we will serve the Lord." There was no option C. I'd like to have a little of both, please. It wasn't an option like that. And then in 1 Kings chapter 18, First Kings chapter 18 and verse 21. And Elijah came unto all the people and said, "How long halt ye between two opinions? If the Lord be God, follow him. But if Baal, then follow him." And the people answered him not a word. Elijah, then in 1 Kings, he said, look, there's no in between. You've got to make a decision. You've got to make a choice. Will you serve God? Will you follow the Lord, or will you follow the world? James chapter 4. James chapter 4 and verse 4. "Ye adulterers and adulteresses, know ye not that the friendship of the world is enmity with God? Whosoever therefore will be a friend of the world is the enemy of God." Excuse me. So James says, hey, ye adulterers and adulteresses, know ye not that friendship of the world is enmity with God? Whoever will be a friend of this world is the enemy of God. Some people, though, have argued that it's okay to have God on the right arm and the world on the left, and walk through life, however, being friends with both. To argue that it's okay to serve God on Sunday, it's okay to serve God on Wednesday, and then serve the world the rest of the week. Ever trying to divide and compartmentalize their lives so as to squeeze God into a corner or stuff Him into a pocket. So that He can say, I'm a good Christian. In this part of my life, or in these hours, or when I'm doing that or this. Christ here demonstrates in this message that it is impossible for the human heart to be divided between God and the world. Beloved, whoever has his eye partly on God and partly on self, he who endeavors, tries to grasp both heavenly and worldly, to serve them both, deceives his own soul and is in danger of losing both. For sure, he is in danger of missing out, missing the kingdom of God. Indeed, what I'm preaching about has eternal consequences, because there is more to life than what there is here and now. In Luke chapter 16, we're told of two men. We're told of the rich man who loved the world and Lazarus who loved the Lord. In Luke 16, verse 19, it says, Jesus said, Luke chapter 16, I'll get there in a minute, verse 19, there was a certain rich man which was clothed in purple and fine linen, fared sumptuously every day. There was a certain beggar named Lazarus, which was laid at his gate full of sores, and desiring to be fed with the crumbs which fell from the rich man's table. Moreover, the dogs came and licked his sores. It came to pass that the beggar died and was carried by the angels into Abraham's bosom. The rich man also died and was buried, and in hell he lifted up his eyes, being in torments, and seeth Abraham afar off, and Lazarus in his bosom. And he cried and said, Father Abraham, have mercy on me, and send Lazarus, that he may dip the tip of his finger in water and cool my tongue, for I am tormented in this flame. But Abraham said, Son, remember that thou in thy lifetime receivest thy good things, and likewise Lazarus evil things. But now he is comforted, and thou art tormented. In our text, the word mammon is used. He said, no man can serve two masters. Either he will hate the one and love the other, or else he will hold to the one and despise the other. You cannot serve God and mammon. That word mammon means riches. Excuse me. It's a word that means the riches or the good things of this world. And man, this world has some fine things. No question of it. And we ought to be thankful for the fine things in life, in this physical life, which whenever we consider a topic like this, and we look at what Jesus is saying, let us not make the mistake of assuming that Jesus is against, or let us not think that he is only talking to rich people. Read it again there in Matthew chapter 6 and verse 24. First of all, who's he addressing? No man can serve two masters. No man, or in other words, no one. This isn't only to the rich. Now there are verses that are written specifically to the rich, but this is for everyone. Also, he is not telling us that it is wrong to be rich. In fact, he delighted. Jesus, as I was studying this out, I found Jesus delighted in the friendship he had with a little family in Bethany. If you go with me to Matthew chapter 26. Matthew chapter 26 and verse 6. Now when Jesus was in Bethany, in the house of Simon the leper, there came unto him a woman having an alabaster box of very precious ointment, and poured it on his head as he sat at meat. But when his disciples saw it, they had indignation, saying, to what purpose is this waste? For this ointment might have been sold for much and given to the poor. When Jesus understood it, he said unto them, why trouble ye the woman? For she hath wrought a good work upon me. For ye have the poor always with you, but me ye have not always. For in that she hath poured this ointment on my body, she did it for my burial. Verily I say unto you, wheresoever this gospel shall be preached in the whole world, there shall also this, that this woman hath done, be told for a memorial of her. So, here's a woman in a family that apparently had some fine things of this world. Some precious ointment in alabaster box. Not typically the things you'd find among the poor. And in fact, when she started to use it on Jesus there, pour it on his head, the disciples got kind of upset. They said, pretty upset actually. They said, what in the world? You're wasting this valuable thing. It could have been sold and given to the poor. Jesus said no. But my point is that the Lord was with some rich folks during his earthly ministry, and rich folks were with the Lord. He sought out Zacchaeus in Luke chapter 19. In Luke chapter 19. The one thing we often remember about Zacchaeus is he was a man of very short stature. Luke chapter 19, beginning at verse number 2. There's something else that we can pick up or glean from Zacchaeus. In verse 1, And Jesus entered and passed through Jericho, and behold, there was a man named Zacchaeus, which was chief among the publicans, and he was rich. So here's this rich man, Zacchaeus, and he sought to see Jesus, who he was, and could not for the press, because he was little of stature. And he ran before and climbed up into a sycamore tree to see him, for he was to pass that way. And when Jesus came to the place and looked up and saw him, and said unto him, Zacchaeus, make haste and come down, for today I must abide at thy house. And he made haste and came down and received him joyfully. And when they saw it, they all murmured, saying that he was gone to be guest with a man that is a sinner. And Zacchaeus stood and said unto the Lord, Behold, Lord, the half of my goods I gave to the poor, And if I have taken anything from any man by false accusations, I restore him fourfold. Jesus said unto him, Today, this day, is salvation come to this house, forasmuch as he also is a son of Abraham. For the Son of Man is come to seek and to save that which was lost. So we see Zacchaeus, this rich man, he couldn't see Jesus. What he was looking for him for, I don't know. Maybe he was curious or whatever, but he at least made this grand attempt. But we find that Jesus called him down out of the tree and said, hey, today is the day of salvation. Zacchaeus was a rich man, though. We find that he even admitted that he had given half of his goods to the poor. Not all of them. The Bible doesn't teach that rich men are to give all of their goods to the poor. We're not talking about some socialism or communism, Marxist thing here. We're talking about willingly giving to the poor. But my point is in this, is that it's easy to say, oh, I wish that so-and-so was here for this, or this message is for the rich, but it is not only for the rich. He addresses you, he addresses me, he addresses all of us. And this is the point. When we get down to it, rich and poor alike are tempted to make an idol out of the things of this world. It doesn't matter if you have a whole bunch of it or a little bit of it. And this is what Jesus is talking about. Once we break down the barriers and understand that people are people, and that Jesus has come to save rich people as well as poor people, that we're all sinners, here's the deal. As depraved people, rich and poor alike, we sometimes make a lot out of the things of this world. And Jesus is saying you cannot serve God and mammon. It's evident now that mammon is personification. One can scarcely serve an inanimate object. But we must understand, he's not talking about the object itself, but it means the God of this world. He means the God of riches. He means the pleasures of it all. Whenever you really get down to it, it is really the service of Satan. The Bible doesn't say that money is the root of all evil. Some people get that wrong. The Bible says the love of money is the root of all evil. And indeed, we have to be careful of what we make out of these things. In 1 John chapter 2, John chapter 2, verse 15, he says, Love not the world, neither the things that are in the world. If any man love the world, the love of the Father is not in him. For all that is in the world, the lust of the flesh, the lust of the eyes, the pride of life, is not of the Father, but is of the world. And the world passeth away, and the lust thereof, but he that doeth the will of God abideth forever. These two, God and mammon, you cannot serve them both. They are dying. Their orders are diametrically opposed to each other. Consider it for a moment. One commands you to walk by faith. The other to walk by sight. One says to be humble. The other to be proud. One says to set your affection on things above, while the other says to set your affection on things that are here. One says to look at things unseen and eternal, but the other says to look at the physical and the temporary, and to dwell on that. One says to be careful for nothing, but the other says to be anxious and worry. One tells us to be content. The other says to covet. One to be ready to distribute. The other to withhold. No man can serve two masters. Back there in our text, let's go look at it again. No man can serve two masters, for either he will hate the one and love the other, or else he will hold to the one and despise the other. You cannot serve God and mammon. We find within this little verse what it is to serve God. It is to love Him. Not just the lip service to say, I love you, God, but in deed and in truth. It's got to be a wholehearted love. Deuteronomy chapter 6. Deuteronomy chapter 6 and verse 5. Deuteronomy 6 and verse 5 says this: Thou shalt love the Lord thy God with all thy heart, with all thy soul, with all thy might. A complete love. And in John chapter 15, John chapter 15, John 14 and verse 15. Try that again. It says, if you love me, keep my commandments. What is it to tell the Lord and to tell the world that we love God, but then to serve mammon, to serve the world, to live, dare I say it, as though there is no God. My grandfather used to call them practical atheists. People that go to church, people who say that they love God, but then live like there is no God. Our service to God must be wholehearted. And Jesus says, if you love me, keep my commandments. It's a love that is in deed and in truth. The 119th Psalm. Excuse me. Verse 69. The proud have forged a lie against me, but I will keep thy precepts with my whole heart. The psalmist says, hey, the proud have, they tell lies. They forged a lie against me, but I'm going to keep thy precepts. I'm going to keep your law, keep your word with my whole heart. To serve God, according to our text, means to hold to or to cleave to Him. He says he'll either hate the one and love the other, or else he'll hold to the one and despise the other. You see, you got these actions and reactions that are going on here as you try to serve two masters. But in this, what the Lord is telling us, we find what it is to serve God, and that is to cleave to Him, to hold to Him. In the 119th Psalm again, in verse 31, he says, I have stuck unto thy testimonies, O Lord, put me not to shame. We know that we'll never be separated from the love of God. We know that we're safe in the hands of God, and we know that no one is able to pluck us out of out of the Father's hand, I tell you what, we can sure drift. We can sure move. It doesn't mean that we lose our salvation, but we get caught up in the things of this world. Backslide. Fall into sin. And make sure that we are totally cleaving to the Lord. Thank God He holds on to us, but we need to be holding to Him too. We're safe and secure in our salvation, but in our daily walk, understand we need to cleave and hold to Him. So many under this great big umbrella that we call Christianity in this world today. They go to some building somewhere and think they're all right. Maybe they go there once a week. Maybe they go there twice a week. Maybe they're fixing to go. Maybe they went there today for the first time since April or March. But they think they're okay because they can recite the Lord's Prayer or some creed. The Bible teaches us, though, in order to serve God properly, we must cleave to Him in the affections of our hearts as well as the activities and obediences of our lives every day. Not a half-hearted service, but a wholehearted. You can't try to serve two masters. You'll fail. As I mentioned earlier, mammon here in our text means riches. Earthly riches. And so the question does come up. How is it that riches become a master? A couple weeks ago I preached about riches, and I was talking about some good and godly men who were rich in that sermon. And I mentioned Job, I mentioned David, I mentioned Abraham. So again, it's not a sin to be rich. But the problem is, and where people get in trouble is, having two masters. And the way riches become a master is through the corrupt hearts of depraved men. People who make an idol out of their riches. Those who delight in the things of this world more than they delight in the things of God. Trusting in these things more than trusting in God. Go with me to the book of Colossians, chapter 3. Colossians chapter 3 and verse 5. Mortify, therefore, your members which are upon the earth, fornication, uncleanness, inordinate affection, evil concupiscence, and covetousness, which is idolatry. So covetousness is idolatry. So be careful of putting those things, making an idol out of what you have or what you want even. Coveting things that the next door neighbor has, or the guy on Facebook posted. Be careful about those things. that it doesn't become an idol. There'll always be a better set of tires, or a better suit, or better house, whatever. Like I said, this isn't just for the rich, it's for all of us. Ephesians chapter 5 and verse 5. For this ye know, that no whoremonger, nor unclean person, nor covetous man, who is an idolater, hath any inheritance in the kingdom of Christ and of God. So again, he brings up covetousness with idolatry. And so whenever we think about idolatry, we think about the children of Israel and how quickly they turned to idols, and we wonder how they did it. If we look in the Word of God, we find out of how quickly we have done it. And like them, we must choose. I know the Arminians have run with these verses that I read there in Joshua and Kings, and they make it say things that never was saying. He's not talking about make a choice for salvation, but we're talking about in service. Who will you serve? The choice has been set before us. Will you serve God or will you serve mammon? You can't serve both. Choose the Lord, and your whole house, including your finances, should be in subordination to the service of Him. Once that happens, you get your house in order, your life in order, God alone, completely, as master of our whole life. That's what he's talking about. That's what Joshua was talking about. That's what Elijah was talking about. That's what all of these texts that we looked at, that's what they were talking about in this theme of serving God. May the Lord bless you with this message. Brother Lino, would you please pray